The village sat quietly between long red earth roads that remembered every footstep. Dust rose with each passing traveler, then settled again like it was keeping secrets. Small houses with tin roofs leaned toward one another, and the open market breathed with life. Women calling out prices, children laughing, goats wandering freely. At the edge of the village stood ancient trees, their wide branches stretching like listening ears. Under those trees, stories were born, judged, and passed down. Every evening, elders gathered there. Their voices were slow and deep, shaped by age and truth. They spoke in proverbs, because in the village, wisdom was not shouted, it was planted. Words are seeds. One elder often said, tapping his walking stick on the ground. They grow when the time is right. The village listened. Among the people lived a man known for his strength. His hands were rough from work, his back bent from carrying loads that fed homes that were not his own. He woke before the sun and returned after it slept. To him, pain was proof of manhood, and silence was courage. When trouble came, he swallowed it. When questions rose, he buried them. A neighbor once asked him, "Brother, why do you never speak of your worries?" He replied without looking up, "A man who talks too much leaks his strength." Those words became his shield and his prison. His wife was different. She moved softly like morning light. Her hands were gentle, her eyes full of patience. She greeted elders with respect and spoke kindly even when her heart felt heavy. Inside her grew a child, still unseen by the world. She carried the pregnancy quietly, the way women in the village carried many things, hope, fear, and endurance. At night, she rested her hands on her stomach and whispered prayers only the ancestors could hear. Their home was small, and poverty sat with them like an uninvited guest. Empty pots waited longer for food. Torn clothes waited longer to be mended. The village noticed. Whispers followed the woman as she walked to the stream. "A good wife brings fortune," some said. Others added, "A strong man should not struggle this much." Those words pressed into the marriage like stones. The man grew distant. The woman grew quieter. Love still lived there, but it was tired. One afternoon, accusations rose like smoke. A lie, spoken carelessly, found many ears. The woman tried to explain, but explanations need listeners, and her home had none. Her husband chose silence again, this time against her. She waited for defense. None came. That night, she packed a small cloth bag. Before dawn, she stood at the doorway and looked back once. Her husband slept, facing the wall. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "We will survive." She walked away before the village woke, before questions could stop her. The red earth received her footsteps and kept quiet. When the man discovered she was gone, anger came first, then pride. She chose pride over patience, he told himself. She could not endure her. Under the ancestral tree that evening, an elder spoke softly, as if to the wind, "What the earth hides, time will uncover." The words floated into the night, following the woman as she disappeared into the wide world, guided by fate, watched by the ancestors, carrying a future no one yet understood. The village rested on red earth that held memories like a drum holds sound. Long, dusty roads cut through the land, leading to open markets where voices rose and fell with the sun. Women sold grain and vegetables, men bargained loudly, and children ran barefoot, laughing as if tomorrow held no worries. At the center of it all stood the ancestral trees, old and wide, their roots deep in the ground, and their branches heavy with silence and truth. Under those trees, the village listened to itself. When the sun leaned low, elders gathered there. Their backs were bent, but their words were straight. They spoke slowly, not because they were weak, but because wisdom must walk, not run. An elder would clear his throat and say, "A home does not fall in one day. It cracks little by little." Another would answer, "And a lie grows faster when the truth sleeps." In that village, such words were law. They shaped how people judged love, marriage, and honor. Among the villagers lived a man whose life was built on hard work. His hands were always busy, his clothes always stained with soil and sweat. He believed a man proved himself by how much he endured without complaint. When hunger knocked, he tightened his belt. When worries came, He locked them inside his chest. One evening, a friend said to him, "Brother, even the strongest tree bends when the wind is heavy." He replied, eyes fixed on the ground, "A tree that bends too much breaks." Silence was his strength, or so he believed. His wife walked a softer path. Her voice was gentle, her steps careful. She greeted elders with respect and neighbors with kindness, even when her heart fell heavy. Inside her body grew new life, hidden like a seed beneath the soil. She had not spoken of it, not even to her husband. In her world, patience was a duty and endurance was love. At night, when the house was quiet, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "Child, be strong." The world listens even when people do not. Their marriage struggled under the weight of poverty. The cooking pot often echoed when stirred. Clothes were mended again and again. The village watched closely, as villages always do. Whispers followed her footsteps. "A woman must bring peace," one voice said. "A man must be respected," another replied. These words entered the home like smoke, unseen but choking. The husband grew distant, carrying the village's judgment on his shoulders. The wife waited for comfort that never came. Then came the accusation, sharp, sudden, and false. It spread quickly, carried by careless tongues. The woman stood before her husband, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. "Listen to me," she pleaded softly. "I have done no wrong." He looked away. His silence, once his armor, became her wound. Days passed without apology, without defense. The elders watched, but tradition taught them that some lessons must ripen on their own. Before dawn one morning, the woman rose. She wrapped her few belongings in cloth and stood at the doorway. The house felt colder than the night air. She looked back once, hoping for a word, a sign. None came. She touched her stomach and whispered, "We will walk forward." Her feet met the red earth, and the earth did not question her. It received her steps and kept her secret. When the man awoke and found the house empty, anger filled him. Soon after came pride. She chose pride over patience, he told himself. She refused to endure. That evening, beneath the ancestral tree, an elder spoke as if speaking to time itself. What the earth hides, time will uncover. The wind carried the words beyond the village, following the woman as she disappeared into the wide world, guided by fate, watched by ancestors, and carrying a future that would one day return to speak. The village woke each day to the sound of footsteps on red earth. The roads were rough, but they connected every life, every story. In the open market, voices mixed with the smell of grain and smoke. Elders sat beneath the ancestral trees, their eyes half closed, their ears open to everything. They believed the land listened, and so they chose their words carefully. "This ground is memory," one elder often said. "Walk on it with truth." Among the people stood a man known for his strength. His shoulders were wide, his arms hard like carved wood. He worked longer than most and complained less than any. When others rested, he lifted another load. When hunger visited his home, he smiled as if nothing was wrong. The village respected him. They pointed at him and told their sons, "That is how a man stands." He believed those words deeply. To him, silence was power, endurance was honor. Speaking of pain felt like weakness. One evening, as he repaired a broken tool, a younger man asked, "Brother, does your heart never get tired?" He wiped his hands and answered, "A man who listens to his heart will forget his duty." Those who heard him nodded, but the elders exchanged quiet looks. His wife lived beside him like a shadow that carried light. She rose early, fetched water, and returned with greetings for every neighbor. Her voice was soft, her smile respectful. Inside her body grew a child, hidden like a seed beneath dry soil. She had not spoken of it. In her mind, good wives waited. They endured. They trusted time. When her husband returned each night, tired and silent, she served him with care. Sometimes she wanted to speak, to share the weight in her chest, but his silence stood like a wall. Poverty pressed into their home slowly. The pot was often empty. The roof leaked when the rain was heavy. The village noticed everything. "She is too quiet," some women whispered. "He works too hard to struggle like this," others said. Those words reached the man's ears. They fed his pride and hardened his heart. He began to see failure everywhere but in himself. One afternoon, a careless lie was spoken in the market. It grew legs and ran fast. By evening, it had reached his home. The woman stood before him, her hands shaking. "Please," she said, her voice low, "ask me before you judge me." He turned away, jaw tight. The village does not lie without reason. Her chest felt heavy. She wanted to scream, but tradition taught her silence. She waited for his defense. None came. Days passed. The house grew colder. The space between them widened like a crack in dry land. The elders watched from under the trees, knowing some lessons cannot be forced. Before dawn, while the sky was still dark, the woman stood and packed her few belongings. She looked at her husband sleeping, his back turned. She touched her stomach gently. "We will walk," she whispered, "even if the road is long." She stepped outside. The red earth received her feet without question. When the man woke and found the house empty, anger rose first. Then pride wrapped around it. "She chose pride over patience," he said aloud, as if the walls could agree. She could not endure. That evening, an elder spoke beneath the ancestral tree, his voice calm but heavy. "What the earth hides, time will uncover." The wind carried the words far, following the woman as she disappeared into the wide world, guided by fate, carrying life, and leaving behind a man whose silence had spoken too loudly. The village breathed slowly with the rhythm of the land. Red earth roads curved between small homes, carrying the marks of many journeys. In the open market, baskets of grain rested beside laughing children, and the smell of roasted maize mixed with dust and sweat. At the edge of the village stood the ancestral trees, tall and patient. Beneath them, elders sat as they always had, their voices low, their words heavy with meaning. They believed stories did not belong to people alone, but to the land that heard them. "This ground sees more than our eyes," an elder would say, "and it remembers longer than our hearts." Among the villagers lived a woman whose presence was gentle, almost quiet enough to be missed. She spoke softly, never raising her voice above respect. Each morning, she greeted the elders with bowed head and careful words. Each evening, she returned home before darkness, believing order was a form of honor. Tradition lived in her steps and her silence. Inside her body grew a life she had not spoken of. The child rested unseen, like a promise buried beneath the soil. At times, fear wrapped around her heart. At other times, hope rose stronger than fear. She hid her pregnancy not out of shame, but out of belief. In her mind, patience healed wounds. Endurance restored love. At night, when the house was quiet, she placed her palm over her stomach and whispered, "You must wait with me." The elders say time reveals all things. Her husband returned each day tired and silent. She served him food, even when the pot was nearly empty. She listened to his footsteps, hoping it was slow, hoping his eyes would soften. But poverty pressed into their home like a stubborn shadow. Empty plates spoke louder than words. Torn clothes told stories no one wanted to hear. The village watched closely. It always did. "A wife must bring peace," women murmured near the stream. "A man should not struggle like this," men said in the market. Those words drifted into the home like smoke. The woman felt them settle on her chest. Still, she kept quiet. She believed love was proven by how much one could endure without complaint. One afternoon, a careless accusation was spoken. It grew quickly, carried by tongues that did not pause to taste truth. The woman stood before her husband, her eyes wide with hurt. "Please," she said softly, "listen to me before you believe others." He did not answer. His silence felt heavier than anger. In that moment, she understood something had broken. Days passed. No apology came. No defense followed. She moved through the house like a visitor, unseen. Her patience, once strong, began to ache. Before dawn, while the skies still slept, she rose. She wrapped her few belongings in cloth and stood at the doorway. She looked back once, hoping for a word, a sign. None came. She touched her stomach gently. "We will walk forward," she whispered, "even if the road is long." Her feet met the red earth. The land accepted her, without judgment. When her husband awoke and found the house empty, he felt anger first, then pride. She chose pride over patience, he told himself. She could not endure. That evening, beneath the ancestral trees, an elder spoke to those gathered. What the earth hides, time will uncover. The wind carried the words far beyond the village, following the woman as she disappeared into the wider world. Guided by fate, watched by the ancestors, carrying both hope and sorrow toward a future still unseen. The red earth no longer felt warm beneath their home. It had grown hard, like a clenched fist. Each morning, the sun rose over the village the same way, but inside the house, hope rose slower. The cooking pot sat longer on the fire, giving less. When the wife stirred it, the spoon scraped the bottom with a sound that felt like shame. She lowered her eyes and said gently, "We will manage today." Her husband tied his worn sandals and answered without turning, "Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow often sounded like yesterday. He worked from sunrise until his muscles burned. He carried loads for others, dug fields that were not his, and returned home with dust on his skin and pride in his chest. Yet what he brought was never enough. Poverty followed him like a shadow that refused to leave. At night, he sat quietly, counting what little remained. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. The wife wanted to speak, to tell her back ached, her heart felt tired, and a child was growing inside her. But she swallowed the words. In her world, a woman's strength was patience. Outside, the village watched. Near the well, women spoke in low voices. "She is too calm for a hungry home," one said. "Maybe she does not push him enough," another replied. In the market, men shook their heads. "A man like him should not struggle this way," they said. "Something is wrong in that house." These words traveled faster than kindness. They slipped through walls and settled between husband and wife. One evening, the man came home empty-handed. He dropped his tools and sat heavily. His jaw tightened. "I work like an ox," he said, breaking a silence. "Yet this house remains poor." The wife knelt beside him. "Hard times test all homes," she said softly. "We must stand together." He pulled his hand away. "Together does not fill pots." Her chest tightened, but she bowed her head. The child inside her moved, as if sensing the weight of the moment. She pressed her palm gently against her stomach and breathed. Days passed. Hunger sharpened tempers. Small things became heavy things. A broken bowl led to harsh words. A missing coin became suspicion. Distance grew where closeness once lived. Then came the whispers, stronger, crueler. A careless tongue accused. The accusation spread like dry fire. The wife stood before her husband, her voice trembling but clear. "By the ancestors," she said, "I have done no wrong. Listen to me." He stared at the floor. The village's voice was louder in his ears than hers. His silence cut deeper than shouting. That night, she sat alone, tears falling quietly. She spoke to the unborn child in her womb. "Some storms do not break roofs," she whispered. "They break hearts." Before dawn, she rose. Poverty had taken much, but it had not taken her dignity. She wrapped her few belongings in cloth. She looked around the house that once held dreams. She paused at the doorway. For a moment, she hoped he would wake. He did not. She stepped onto the red earth. The road did not ask questions. It only opened itself. When the man woke and found the space beside him empty, anger rushed in. He walked outside, looking down the road she had taken. Pride followed anger quickly, like a shield. She chose pride over patience, he said aloud. She could not endure hardship. That evening, beneath the ancestral trees, elders gathered as always. One elder struck the ground gently with his staff and spoke to those listening, and to those who were not. "What the earth hides," he said, "time will uncover." The wind carried the words along the red road, following the woman as she disappeared into the wider world, guided by fate, carrying life within her, while the village remained behind, waiting for truth to return. The village rested between long red earth roads that curved like old stories. Each road led to the open market, where voices rose with the sun and fell with the evening wind. At the edge of the land stood ancestral trees, their branches wide and heavy, their roots deep in memory. Beneath them, elders sat each day, sharing wisdom shaped by years and silence. They believed the land listened, and so they spoke carefully. Truth walks slowly, one elder often said, tapping the ground with his staff. But lies run fast and arrive tired. In that village lived a man known for his strength. His body was shaped by labor, his hands hard like stone. He worked without rest and spoke without complaint. To him, endurance was proof of manhood, and silence was honor. When pain came, he carried it alone. When doubt knocked, he locked the door of his heart. His wife moved through the village like calm water. She greeted elders with respect and neighbors with kindness. Her voice was soft, but her spirit was steady. Inside her grew a child she had not spoken of, hidden like a seed beneath dry soil. Hope and fear lived together in her chest, but she believed patience could heal what words could not. Poverty pressed into their home slowly, day by day. The cooking pot echoed when stirred. Clothes were patched more than replaced. The man worked harder, yet the struggle remained. The woman tried to hold peace together with gentle hands, but peace needs two hearts to survive. The village began to watch more closely. At the well, whispers floated like dust. "She is too quiet," one woman said. "Maybe she hides something," another replied. In the market, men spoke with shaking heads. "A strong man should not live this way," they said. "Something is wrong in that house." These words moved faster than truth. They found ears before they found sense. One afternoon, a careless accusation was spoken aloud. It had no proof, only sound. By evening, it had grown strong enough to stand on its own. The woman felt the change immediately. Greetings turned cold. Eyes followed her steps. Laughter stopped when she approached. She returned home and stood before her husband, her hands folded tightly. "People are talking," she said gently. "They are saying things that are not true." He did not look at her. "The village does not speak without reason," he replied. Her heart trembled. "Listen to me," she pleaded. "I am your home." But his ears were already filled with other voices. Pride stood beside him, tall and stubborn. He chose the noise of outsiders over the quiet truth before him. Days passed. Silence replaced conversation. Trust thin like worn cloth. The woman spoke less. The man spoke only in short, hard words. Each night, she lay awake, one hand on her stomach, whispering to the life inside her. "Be patient," she murmured. "Time sees what people hide." The elders watched from beneath the ancestral trees. They knew gossip was a dangerous fire, but tradition taught them that some lessons must burn before they can heal. Then one evening, the man came home with anger in his eyes. "I hear too many stories," he said. "I will not be made a fool." She stood still, her voice shaking. "Stories are not truth," she said. "Ask your heart." He turned away. His silence was sharper than any accusation. That night, the woman understood something had ended. Not love, but protection. Before dawn, she rose quietly. She wrapped her few belongings in cloth. She stood at the doorway and looked back, hoping for a word, a sign. None came. She placed her palm over her stomach and whispered, "We will walk forward." Her feet touched the red earth, and the road accepted her without question. When the man woke and found the house empty, anger rushed through him, followed by pride. She chose pride over patience, he said to himself. She could not endure her. That evening, beneath the ancestral trees, an elder spoke softly into the wind. "What the earth hides, time will uncover." The words traveled far, following the woman as she disappeared into the wider world. Guided by fate, watched by the ancestors, carrying truth within her, while the village waited for time to speak. The village still woke to the same sounds, the call of birds, the shuffle of feet on red earth, the distant voices from the open market. But inside the small house, something had gone quiet in a way that felt wrong. Silence lived there now, not the strong silence of peace, but the cold silence of neglect. The wife moved through the home like a guest who had stayed too long. She swept the floor, cooked what little food she could find, and waited. She waited for a question, a glance, a sign that she was still seen. Most days, none came. Her husband returned each evening tired and dusty. He sat on a stool, ate in silence, and stared at the wall as if answers were written there. When she spoke, he nodded without listening. When she stopped speaking, he did not notice. One night, she said softly, "You did not ask how my day was." He shrugged. "Days are the same. Hunger does not change." Her words fell to ground and broke like dry leaves. She began to understand that anger was not the deepest wound. Neglect was. When someone shouted, at least they saw you. But when someone looked past you, it meant you had become invisible. She cried often now, but quietly. Her tears fell into her cloth, into the fire ashes, into the dark where no one could see them. She no longer wiped her eyes quickly. There was no one left to hide from. Inside her, the child stirred. Sometimes she smiled through her pain and whispered, "You hear me, don't you?" The unborn life became her only witness, her only comfort. The home no longer felt like shelter. The walls did not protect her. The roof did not cover her heart. Even the night felt safer than the day, because darkness did not pretend to care. Outside, the village continued to talk. "She walks like a shadow," some said. "Maybe she's brought shame," others whispered. Their voices reached her ears, but what hurt more was that her husband listened to them. She heard him repeat their words, slowly, carefully, as if they were wisdom. One evening, she stood before him, her voice shaking. "When you listen to them, where do I stand?" He answered without looking at her. "A man must hear his people." "And your wife?" she asked. He was silent. That silence told her everything. That night, she sat alone and spoke to the ancestors the way elders taught children to pray. "If patience is wisdom," she whispered, "how long must wisdom bleed?" The ancestral trees outside stood still, their branches unmoving as if listening. "Before dawn," she rose. Her body felt heavy, but her decision was light. She packed her few belongings slowly, touching each one as if saying goodbye to a dream that had grown tired. She stood in the doorway and looked back at the house. Once, it had been full of hope. Now it held only echoes. She placed her hand over her stomach. "We will find shelter," she whispered, "even if it is far from here." She stepped onto the red earth. The road welcomed her feet, without judgment. When her husband woke and found the space beside him empty, he felt something tighten in his chest. But pride spoke first. She chose pride over patience, he said. She could not endure her. That evening, beneath the ancestral trees, an elder spoke calmly, as if speaking to time itself. "What the earth hides, time will uncover." The wind carried those words along the road, following the woman as she disappeared into the wider world. Guided by fate, carrying unseen tears, unseen strength, and a future that would one day return to speak. The night still covered the village when she opened her eyes. The moon hung low, pale and quiet, as if it too was afraid to wake the world. Roosters had not yet called the morning, and the red earth roads lay empty, waiting. She sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound. The small house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Beside her, her husband slept, turned away, his back rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She watched him for a long moment, searching his silence for the man she once knew. She found only distance. She stood and wrapped a cloth around her shoulders. The air was cold, but her heart was calm. When a decision has been made by pain and patience together, it no longer shakes. She gathered her few belongings, clothes worn thin, a small calabash, memories folded like old fabric. Each item felt lighter than before, as if it too was ready to leave. She paused, then rested her hand on her stomach. Inside her, the child stirred softly, like a gentle knock from the future. "Be still," she whispered. "We are walking soon." She did not wake anyone. In the village, goodbyes are sometimes heavier than journeys. She stepped to the doorway and looked back once more. The walls had heard her prayers. The floor had caught her tears. Still, the house had not protected her. Outside, the village slept. The open market stood silent, baskets empty, voices resting. The ancestral trees loomed in the distance, their branches dark against the sky. She bowed her head toward them, a sign of respect taught since childhood. Elders of yesterday, she murmured, walk with me. She did not speak of the life growing inside her, not to the village, not to the night. Some truths need quiet to survive. She carried her pregnancy like a hidden flame, protecting it from wind and judgment. Her bare feet touched the red earth. The road was cool, firm, familiar. Each step felt like a release, like loosening a knot tied too tight for too long. Her footsteps left marks that would soon fade, but the land received them without question. As she walked, memories followed her, laughter once shared, dreams once spoken, promises once believed. They did not stop her. They only reminded her why she must go. At the edge of the village, she stopped and listened. The silence was deep, broken only by the soft sound of her breathing. For a moment, doubt tried to rise. Then she remembered the nights she cried alone, the days she spoke and was not heard, the home that no longer felt like shelter. She straightened her back. Behind her, in that small house, her husband slept on. When he would wake, he would see the empty space and feel a tightening in his chest. Pride would speak before pain. She chose pride over patience, he would say. She could not endure. He would not yet know that endurance sometimes means leaving to survive. As she walked farther, the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. Still, no one saw her. No one called her name. Only fate walked beside her, quiet and patient. Far away, beneath the ancestral trees, an elder would later speak, his voice calm and sure. What the earth hides, he would say, time will uncover. For now, the earth kept her secret. Her footsteps faded into the red soil. Her figure disappeared into the wide world, and the village remained behind, sleeping, unaware that a story had just begun to turn. The red earth roads glimmered faintly in the early light, untouched by footsteps other than her own. The village still slept, unaware that a life, a story, had quietly slipped away. The ancestral trees stood tall, silent witnesses, their roots tangled deep with the memories of generations. They had seen births, deaths, marriages, betrayals, and reconciliations. This morning, they watched as one more secret was carried beyond their shade. Inside the small home, he awoke to emptiness. The blanket beside him felt too wide, too cold. He turned slowly, searching the familiar space. But the warmth was gone. The air carried a stillness that hurt more than anger could. "She has left," he whispered. His voice was low, unsure, yet it carried the certainty of judgment. He walked through the house, touching objects she had left behind, noting what was gone, what remained. A pot still on the fire, the broom propped neatly against the wall, the cloth folded just so. No note, no whisper, no goodbye. Only absence. His chest tightened, but he refused to let pain enter. Pride rose before understanding, and he clutched it like a shield. "She chose pride over patience," he muttered aloud, his eyes scanning the empty room as if the words themselves could summon a reply. "She could not endure hardship. She abandoned me." He convinced himself of her pride because to admit truth would require reflection he was not ready to give. He did not think of the nights she had cried quietly, nor the child she carried within, a life he had yet to know. He did not remember the long days she had waited for a glance, a word, an acknowledgement. It was easier to blame her, easier to harden his heart than soften it. Outside, the village began to stir. Elders noticed the early footprints leaving the home, small and fading into the red soil. "She has gone," one said quietly. Another shook his head, muttering, "What the earth hides, time will uncover." But their voices, though full of wisdom, could not reach him yet. He heard the rumors, the whispers from neighbors, the knowing glances. Each one reinforced his belief. She had left because of her pride, not his silence or neglect. He sat on the edge of the doorstep, staring at the rising sun that touched the red earth with gold. The fire of anger and confusion burned in him. It was anger without understanding, fire without heat for reconciliation. He refused to ask the questions he feared might answer themselves. He refused to walk toward humility, toward responsibility. Days passed, and he carried on his work, moving through the village as if nothing had changed. Yet those who observed could see the shift. The man who once seemed unshakable now moved with shadows behind his eyes. Pride ruled him, hardened him, and left him blind to the truth, that she had left not for pride, but because the home no longer held safety or recognition for the pain she bore. The winds whispered to the market stalls, and the children played unaware of the heart that had quietly stepped beyond the village gates. The elders beneath the ancestral trees spoke once more, their voices soft but firm. "Time uncovers what the earth keeps hidden," they said. "One day he will know what he lost, and perhaps then he will understand. But for now, he believed himself abandoned, his heart armored against regret. He did not see the faint footprints disappearing into the wider world, guided by fate, carrying with them both the life within her and the courage that silence had finally allowed her to find. The village remained behind, its red roads and open market a witness to a story of pride, patience, and the consequences of refusing to see another's pain. The red earth roads stretched like ribbons beneath the rising sun, their surface catching the first light and spilling gold across the village. The open markets were still quiet, the baskets empty, the vendors' voices resting for another day. The ancestral trees stood tall, their roots deep in soil heavy with stories, their branches whispering the wisdom of ages. Beneath them, elders gathered as they always did, their faces lined with time, their eyes carrying the weight of generations. Today, their voices were quieter, more deliberate, as they spoke to the children who listened with rapt attention. "Remember," the oldest elder said, his voice low and steady, "what the earth hides, time will uncover." His words rolled to the circle like a drumbeat, steady and true, echoing in the hearts of all who heard. The children nodded, repeating it softly to themselves, as if the phrase itself held a power beyond understanding. In the small home at the edge of the village, the husband moved through the morning with the quiet certainty of a man accustomed to labor and to silence. He was strong, broad-shouldered, hands calloused from years of toil, yet beneath the surface lay a pride that would not allow him to bend. Not for mercy, not for love. He believed strength was endurance, and that silence was a shield. He believed that life's burdens were meant to be carried alone. Yet the house felt hollow. His wife had gone. She had left without a word, slipping away before the sun rose. He told himself it was pride, that she could not endure the hardships that life had dealt him, that she had chosen to abandon him. In his heart, he convinced himself of her failure rather than his own. He walked through the small rooms, touching the walls as though their familiarity could summon her back. The broom leaned in the corner. The fire pot still held the ashes of last night's embers. The mat where she slept was undisturbed. Nothing betrayed her presence. Nothing promised a return. Outside, the red earth received her footprints, small and careful, fading as she moved toward the open roads. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, a rhythm of dignity and survival. She did not reveal the life she carried, the child growing silently beneath her heart, a secret flame that only she and fate knew. She whispered to it softly, "Be patient, little one. We will find a world that hears us." The elders spoke again beneath the ancestral trees, their voices now carrying the weight of prophecy as well as warning. "What the earth hides, time will uncover," one said, looking toward the horizon. Another nodded, adding, "Do not think the quiet ones have forgotten. The soil remembers. The roots remember. And one day all will be revealed." The husband's pride hardened further as he heard the whispers of the village begin to swirl around him. Neighbors murmured about her departure. Some said she left because of shame, others because of pride. He clung to their interpretations, reinforcing belief he had made for himself. She had abandoned him willingly. Each word he heard cemented the wall around his heart. He did not yet see the truth, that patience had been met with silence, loyalty with neglect, and love with disregard. Meanwhile, she walked on, her bare feet brushing the red soil, the wind carrying the scent of distant rain and promise. Each step was a declaration of survival, each breath a quiet rebellion against the world that had turned its eyes away. She passed the markets, still closed, and the houses where children slept, their dreams untouched by the shadow of sorrow she carried. The ancestral trees whispered as she moved past, their branches swaying gently, a blessing for the journey she had begun. Her heart was heavy, but it was not broken. It carried the weight of her experiences, of the unspoken pain and hidden tears, but it also carried hope, a seed that would grow when the time was right. She had left to protect herself, her dignity, and the child she carried. Each step forward was both an ending and a beginning. The village, still unaware, continued its rhythm. But beneath the quiet, the proverb of the elders lingered like a shadow across every roof and road. What the earth hides, time will uncover. It was a warning, a promise, and a lesson all at once. And somewhere along the red earth road, she moved forward into a world where time itself would guard her secret, and fate would guide her steps, unseen but unerring. Behind her, the husband remained, sitting alone in the empty house. The walls held no answers. The silence was deep. His pride convinced him he had been abandoned, but the wisdom of the earth whispered differently. The future would reveal what the heart had missed, what the eyes had ignored. The earth would remember, and one day, the truth of patience, of hidden strength, and of silent endurance would rise like the sun over the red roads of the village. And so, the story moved quietly, carried with the weight of unspoken tears, the dignity of hidden life, and the slow, inevitable unfolding of what the earth and time would finally uncover. The red earth roads of the village glowed softly in the first touch of dawn, stretching endlessly, flanked by homes built with clay and timber, and by the towering ancestral trees, whose branches whispered secrets older than any living soul. The air carried the faint scent of smoke from early cooking fires, and the musky aroma of the wet earth, freshly kissed by night's dew. The markets, usually alive with the cries of vendors and the laughter of children, lay quiet, waiting for the sun to stir them awake. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat echoed faintly, a heartbeat of land, as though the village itself sensed that today a story was shifting, turning toward the unknown. She walked quietly along the red earth, her steps measured, careful not to disturb the sleeping village she had once called home. Her body carried life, a secret as delicate and precious as the first bloom of the abaddon flower that grew by the riverbanks. The child within her stirred gently, and she pressed a hand over her womb, whispering softly, "We must go where the wind guides us, little one. The earth will keep our secret until the time is right." The breeze carried her words, threading them through the branches of the ancestral trees, as the elders themselves leaned closer to listen, silent witnesses to her departure. Inside the small home she left behind, he moved through the morning with the ease of habit. Yet the house felt hollow, empty in ways he did not understand. His hands lingered over objects she had touched, the mat where she knelt to pray, the broom she leaned against the wall, the small clay pot still warm with the night's meal. Pride rose in his chest like a shield, and he whispered aloud, "She left because she could not endure." She chose her pride over patience. He could not imagine the nights she had cried in silence, the days she had endured without recognition, the quiet loyalty that had gone unnoticed. Outside, the village stirred, awakening to the ordinary rhythms of life. Yet beneath this normalcy, stories began to weave through the red earth roads. Neighbors whispered, some in judgment, others in sympathy, but the truth of her departure remained hidden. The elders under the ancestral trees observed, their eyes shadowed with wisdom. One spoke softly, "What the earth hides, time will uncover." His voice carried like a drumbeat across the village, a gentle reminder that even hidden truths, unseen sacrifices, and silent endurance would one day rise into the light. Her steps carried her beyond the familiar, into fields and forests that had long whispered of freedom and destiny. She passed a river that cut through the village outskirts, where the water shimmered in dawn's light, reflecting the sky as though it held the infinite paths of possibility. The birds began their morning chorus, fluttering around her as if guiding her forward. She felt the weight of her choice, the loneliness that would accompany her for now. Yet she also felt the stirrings of hope. Fate was shaping her journey, and the ancestors watched, their presence invisible but undeniable, as if the very wind carried their approval and their caution. She paused briefly atop a small rise, looking back at the village she loved and left behind. The red roofs, the winding paths, the open market stalls, everything seemed smaller from this distance. She drew a deep breath, tasting the earth, the air, the freedom of movement beyond the gaze of judgment and misunderstanding. "We will survive," she whispered, placing her hands over her belly. "And one day, the truth will be known." The words were a promise, not only to the child she carried but to herself, a vow of endurance and courage in the face of unseen trials.